All right, welcome everybody to What Makes It Tick. It is May 14th, and we're looking to talk a little bit about power. Today, we're talking about power in the aspect of the production world, and a little bit more about it came to light today because we were working with our remote studio, and they fought the morning because they could not get their rack to turn on because their UPS was overloaded. And it was a small little surprise, and then they had to solve that problem. So we started talking about power factor, we started talking about other things, and I was like, that is a great conversation that so many people have a hard time and struggle with many times about that. So first off, once want to say thanks for everybody that's here live with us right now. Thanks for dropping in, Guy. Thanks for dropping in, Robert. And also welcome Eric, one of the first times I think he's been around, and welcome back Sal from over in Houston. He got in, he figured out the time zones difference between us and them, so that's great. He lives really far away over there. And then Greg coming from the real north all the way up in the, like, is it still snowing there? I thought I saw in
Nope.
the news it was actually snowing again in the north.
No, last week. That was it. It's
That was it.
it's done
Okay.
for the year, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, it's 89 degrees outside where I'm at. It's-
77 here today.
It started out at 63 up here in Katy, and then 90 degrees towards the noon. So yeah, it was
yeah, we've
quite
been
the
feeling.
swing.
I could feel. I already know right now that my next week is going to be spent with AC because
AC,
I could feel my air conditioner's not quite where it
not
needs to
quite
be.
there.
Get on my guy's list and make sure he comes and brings a big bottle of Freon again because I've got a leak somewhere in the
Ooh,
unit, and it's just like a slow leak. So like, what's the point, right? Why replace a $10,000 for a 5 ton? So ridiculous the prices.
yeah.
All right, so talking about power now. All right, so power in the aspect of whenever you build a production system and you put it all together, everything has to have power. Do we just willy-nilly put it all in there and then plug it into the wall, or do you plan of, is this going to take this much power, this unit's going to take this much power, so on and so on, and then figure out, okay, will it work on a 15 amp breaker or a circuit breaker, or a fuse, as some people would call it, but it's a circuit breaker on a power strip, or a circuit breaker in a power distribution unit, or do you need 20 amps? And thus, does your plug that you're plugging into actually have a 20 amp connector? Those little crazy ones, you've probably seen them in like hospitals, especially because they'll have that little dog leg on them. And you'll know if you have the wrong one because it won't fit. The 15 amps are pretty common. That's your normal everyday house unit with the two blades straight up and down, and usually the ground at the bottom. Though there's some people I've heard crazy talk that they flip it around and they put the ground at the top. Whatever, each your own. Electrician should be shot in general. So, all right, so, let's talk about load needs. I have a feeling if I ask Greg, what is your specific load that you would have on your average rack? I bet you know exactly what that is. Am I right or am I wrong?
You're not wrong. Um, I specify 20 amp service for every rack because I know that every rack consumes less.
Right.
So when I'm asking a venue for how much power do we need here in the control room, do we need it front of house? Do we need over there, over here, where we're going to put a camera, blah, blah, blah. That, unless you're going to give me some kind of big, 100 amp, 200 amp cam lock thing that I got to run distribution panels on or something now that dumb that all down to 30s or 20s or whatever.
Right.
And I need to know this ahead of time before I get there because, that's part of the site survey. But yeah, when I build a rack, I never build a rack that needs more than 20. And quite honestly, I don't think let me think for just a second. I do not have a single rack that draws even more than 15. Most of them are 7, 8, 9 amps tops. And how do I know this? Because if you don't have an ammeter, you need an ammeter. You need a multimeter anyway. And you should always, when you show up at a hotel or something, I always stick probes in the socket and make sure it's really 120 and not miswired for 230, because I don't want any of my stuff blowing up. Ask me how I know this. But less than $100 gets
All of us
you,
have been there, and we should know this, right?
yeah, and letting the magic smoke out of the box is no fun. So.
No, definitely not.
So anyhow, $100 or less down at Home Depot, Lowe's will buy you what they call a clamp ammeter. It looks like a meter, but it's got like a pincer kind of thing on it. And what you do is you find a single wire in the electrical, like in the breaker box, and you clamp around the one wire, and the ammeter will tell you how much current is flowing through this one wire. Now, hard to do with most of our stuff, but they make a little plug-in thing that looks like a kind of like a square 8, and you plug.
Through. Yep.
Yeah, and you plug it into the wall, and then there's a socket in the other end of it, and it gives you 2 places that you can clamp the meter onto. And usually there's a regular one and a ×10 or something like that. But anyhow, that breaks the neutral and the hot wire from the outlet out into paths, and then you can clamp around the hot or clamp around the neutral, and then you can get a good reading. So then you know exactly what your rack is running. Now, if you don't have that, UPSs, which you should all be running.
Okay, we're gonna get to there.
Okay,
pause
but
for a sec-
most
pause for now.
UPSs have a means of telling you this too. So if you're plugged in the UPS, just cycle through the menus, and your UPS will tell you exactly how much your rack is drawing at this particular given moment.
And I want to also offer not a new little tool. I've actually had several of them. But most people, I don't know if you've seen them or not, but it's called a kilowatt. So it is a pass-through little meter box, kilowatt.
Watt. Mhm.
And you can find them you can find them, usually you can actually find them at Home Depot, but you can find them on Amazon, of course. A kilowatt little plug. And the reason I like that one is it's super simple. If you're wondering what your computer or your rack or your router, whatever it is, you plug that into the wall. It tells you what the voltage is, of course, but you just plug it in the wall, you plug your device into it, and it tells you what that device is pulling at that point in time. And so that is what I use that as kind of my base because believe it or not, some manufacturers don't tell you the truth.
Mhm.
Yes, this is true. Just today. So now we were trying to figure out, do the numbers. I was trying to help my buddy out, and he's like, all right, so what do you have on this? He goes, well, we got this Blackmagic switcher, it's Blackmagic router. It's like, okay, give me the part numbers. I kind of knew some of them. Started going through, and it's like, okay, so wait, Blackmagic says 115 through 230 volt. That's the power requirement, 300 watts. Greg, how does that work out? How can you have the same amount of watts and the same amount of current draw?
Oh no, it's lower current draw. The higher the voltage, the lower the current draw.
Correct.
Yeah.
But is
Yep.
the 300 watts consistent?
Man, I was told there would be no math on this show.
But
and it's usually max. You know, they usually go with max load, and
it should be. It should be.
Yeah.
But but you're absolutely
normal
right.
load or average load. Yeah.
And that's
Yeah, but that's the
where
thing, because you have to
danger is.
consider that most power supplies are rated for international purposes now. So that here in the States, we use 120, but a lot of the rest of the world uses 220. So, your current consumption is divide by 2. So yeah, I mean, if they're giving you amps at 220, 230, yeah, I mean, over here, yeah, we have to expect that it's twice what the advertised rate is. So yeah.
But since they gave us watts, then we have to use that magic little formula in order to figure it out, which is where is it?
Yeah, power equals current times voltage. Yep.
Yeah. So say that again real slow, Sal.
Power equals current times voltage.
That's right. So then you have to put
or
those
power
numbers
divided
in.
by voltage gives you current. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So misconception we'll call that number 1. We'll go to number 2. Misconception number 2. If I have, and this is just a general thing, but I've always get this. If I have a device that is rated at 1 amp, so let's call it it's a low voltage device. It's a Teradek or a decimator or something, and it needs 12 volts at 1 amp. But my power supply that I have is a 2 amp power supply. How much power does that power supply give out?
Just the 1 amp. It's the draw that really determines. Yeah.
When All right. I'm gonna have to send Sal a nice cold beverage. All right. So many of the people
Yeah,
I've worked with over the years,
They think
they
it's going
get
to put
that.
out 2 amp. Yep.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm gonna burn it up. It's got 2 amps. It's way
No.
too much power. No. If it says it's 1 amp, the max it's ever gonna supposedly pull out is gonna be 1 amp. So it's okay to run it on a 2 amp or even a 5 amp or a 10 amp service, as long as the voltage is the same. Now, if it's 15 volts at 2 amps, something's smoking. If you need
Or your
12
load
volts,
doesn't try to draw more than what the power supply can supply. That's usually,
yes, the opposite. So if you
the
had a
opposite
2 amp
true.
device and your power supply was only a 1 amp service, then
Yeah, it's
it's
gonna
gonna
melt.
smoke.
Unless
Yeah,
it's gonna, yep, exactly. The magic smoke comes out.
exactly. I'm gonna have to keep that in mind, Greg. I love the magic smoke there. So the thing that we were looking at as far as like, how do we figure this out? It's like, first off, list all the equipment. Spreadsheets are your friend here. List all your equipment and the devices you want to be able to power off of any given service. List the amps and the voltage for each device, and those have to be displayed. They have to be on the rating. All these ratings have to be on a label somewhere on the device or the power supply for said device. If they're not, the manufacturer should absolutely have that in their website. Then you multiply your amps by your volts to determine your volt amps, right? And then, so of course, this is where it gets a little more complicated. Some of those devices, i.e. Blackmagic, they only list their power requirements in watts. So you have to convert watts to voltage amps, which is divide the watts by the power factor. To get to power factor later.
Well, power factor, that's a whole, let's get
That's
to
a whole
inductive
other
and
thing.
inductive loads. Yeah.
And then you multiply, and this is like all these steps and everything. And my client, my friend, is just sitting there going like, so do I need a bigger UPS? Just tell me. Just do I need a bigger UPS? I'm like, absolutely. Is it going beep, beep, beep? Then yes.
No, it's a faster beep when you overload. Beep, 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 beep.
Well,
beep.
okay, so here this is I haven't ran into this. Of course, if anything, it's going to be my friends that run into these things. What I ran into with what he was doing is he lost power, and then the UPS wouldn't power up, even though it had been running that load for the longest. They had power back, right?
They're probably trying to
UPS
start
turns on,
everything up at
but
once.
everything was overloading.
And there's a
And this was
transient,
just running. He incrementally added things to it. It would overload whenever it was running on battery, but whenever it was running on shore power or the wall power, it was not. It was almost like it was half the load whenever it was running. So my next question is like, okay, so what kind of UPS are we talking about? And it was a trip light. And all he could figure out by looking at the numbers on it was 15 volt amp. So a 1500 volt amp, or 1.5 kVA as they're calling them now, a lot of them. So that was one of the things that I have not ran across. Now I have ran across APCs for instance, APC UPSs. Sometimes there was a while where they wouldn't power up if you didn't have power going into them at all. And that has kind of gone away. I think most of mine all do that now. So but there are certain manufacturers. CyberPower, I think, Greg, is one of those. You mentioned you had CyberPowers under your desk. If you don't have power going it's not plugged into the wall, it's just sitting there. Will it power up or will it not?
Absolutely. But okay, so let's back up a step. Okay, forget the brand. There's a couple of different types of UPS.
Okay, yeah, we got to talk about that too.
So let's talk about, there's the kind that just passes through the mains voltage until the mains voltage isn't there. Then there's a relay that clicks over to the battery generating. So the battery's not actually doing anything until, oh my God, the power is gone. Correct. Okay. So the other thing to consider is, how old is that battery? We buy UPSs and they sit around forever and don't get charged, and battery health is a big thing in UPSs. So a lot of times, okay, you're rated for 1500 VAs, but your battery is so old and decrepit, you can only get like 800, and I'm only going to last for about 42 seconds. That's it. I'm done.
And that's why it's important to do those periodic or scheduled tests.
Right. It's also important to keep your UPSs plugged in and keep those batteries charged, especially the lead acid
tested,
ones.
because you want to put some load every once in a while on them to get them to
So, and I
Yeah.
can't remember all the different names that they call these stupid things, but that's one way a UPS can work. The better way, and this is the only kind that I buy, is that the incoming mains power charges the battery and the battery generates electricity. So the only electricity that comes out of my UPS is from the battery generation circuit
Mhm.
100% of the time. So when
Those are
the
called dual
mains fit,
conversion.
they also are called line monitoring and other
Well,
kind of
line
depending
monitoring
different
is a little bit different, but dual conversion means that it's going into the DC side and then DC to
Yeah,
AC
okay. But
off
I
of
like those
everything.
a lot because when the
Yep.
mains fail, the only thing that happens is, okay, now my battery's not getting charged.
Right.
The power to my gear didn't change ever,
Yep.
not one cycle. So I love those kinds. So, and they're more expensive,
They are
but
definitely more expensive. Yes.
but you'll also start to see battery health issues because you're running off the battery all the time. So
Sure.
it'll start squawking at you or something. But
Have either of you played around with any of the new lithium ion UPSs yet?
no, because shipping
I
them is a pain in the, you know what? You can only ship
that is true.
batteries that have so much lithium in them. And
Mhm.
even when I ship by truck freight, the company that I use, SOS Global, the truck picks up at my house, takes it right to the airport, and it goes on a
True.
plane to wherever is close to where I want my delivery. And then from the airport, it goes on another truck. So it's always on a plane in between. So you can't fly more than,
A
I
certain
forget
amount of
this.
grams, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it's so many grams or so many watts of a battery in a single piece of gear. So most UPSs are well past what that limit is to fly. So I like the older style batteries. They're either NiCads or lead acid or something. So
On a
Yeah,
side
I've
note, I
been
found
looking
this
at them
really.
just
Oh,
on
sorry.
I just been looking at them really to save weight, and then also they do have a longer runtime on as a whole because it doesn't have that curve that just it's real sharp in a lead acid or a NiCad where you just go from, say, you're at most of the batteries in a UPS are either 24, well, the rails might be 24 or the feeds might be 24 volts or 48 volts for some very rare ones, but the bigger ones, but most of them are at 12 or 24 volts. And when that battery drops below, say, 10.8 volts, it's starting to go. And so you really only have that much, but with a lithium ion, you get a lot longer runtime on it. So that's been one of mine. I've been keeping an eye on, but I have not gone that route because, number one, they're really expensive right now in comparison to any of the
Just a
lead
regular.
lead
Yeah.
or the other batteries that are out
well,
there.
if you wouldn't buy so many Cybertrucks, maybe, that wouldn't,
Not yet.
skew the market so drastically.
Well, that's true. I literally do have a huge UPS in my in my Tesla. So if you look at it that way, it's a double conversion for that matter. Yeah, that's true. So whenever I have an experience of dealing with stuff in data centers too. So it's a little bit different in a data center. A lot of those even are running on 48 volts DC itself. So they're getting DC from a DC source going into the UPS. The UPS is just passing through that DC as a conversion out to AC that's going back out. With most of my my experience with the manufacturers that are out there, I've not had a great experience with Triplite, but I have had great experience with APC, even though batteries are costly and they wear out, but that's just part of doing business. There's been a huge amount of people buying and consolidating companies and stuff now. What I came down with as my short list was Schneider is now also APC, or APC is within the Schneider portfolio, I guess you would call it. Triplite is now with Eaton, EATON, which is huge in everything power wise. Cyberpower, I think, is an outlier. I believe they're still just themselves. And I've had some hits and misses with Cyberpowers over the years. I've had some one-use Cyberpowers that I've never got to work. They were just never worked for. They worked maybe a week or two, and then that was it. And I was trying to do that in the small racks, like you're talking about, Greg. And then now it's got me thinking about these lithium ions again. Is APC came out with a 1U lithium ion, and it's like I want to say it's 1,000 watts, and that 1,000 watts is in just a 1U, and it's only like 12 inches deep, so it's a really nice form factor, especially for those portable rack type situations. So in our truck, so the van, for instance, in that production truck, we actually have 2 UPSs in there because we found that one, even at 2,000 watt size UPS, it was not enough. And the big gotcha was whenever we discharged, and so it went into the UPS mode because the client didn't fill up the generator and the generator turned off. When it went into UPS mode, of course, then we got power back. Well, then it goes back into a charging mode. Well, guess what? It was plugged into a 15 amp breaker. But
Trip
in
the breaker.
charging mode, not line interactive mode, pass through mode, it was underneath the 15 amp. But when it went to charging mode, along with the load that was on it, it was over the 15 amps, trip the breaker.
Oof, fun
And
times.
those are other things you can't
Mhm.
disregard. That 20 amp is on there for a reason. Don't think, oh, I'll just put that adapter
But a
on it. 'Cause it
converter,
comes
yeah.
with the adapter. I'll just put that adapter on there. It's like you'll never need that. Sooner or later, it will be needed, and you'll end up
Absolutely.
with it blowing a breaker. And so whenever we reconfigured the truck with 50 amp power, we actually ended up doing 2 UPSs. So we have one on either leg. So it's 50 amps, but it's 120 volts on 2 legs. So it's technically called a 208Y. And each one of those have up to 50 amps at 120 volts on either leg. And then we have a UPS on either one, and now we have a one AC on one side, and then we're going to put a second AC on the second side. So they'll kind of be load balanced at that point.
And then
That's
that's
another
when,
part.
if you have redundant power supplies in any of your devices, you want to have one power supply going to one UPS, the other power
Exactly.
supply going to the other one. Because I've seen setups where they have all that redundancy and everything's on that, one UPS or all the critical components instead of, whether it's switches or, servers and
Oh,
coders,
that's a
whatnot.
good question. Greg, what about in your server situation for your 3930s? Because I know I bought extra power supplies for a few of them, and I saw run duals on 3, I think, maybe 4 out of the 12. So are yours all duals power supplies?
Yeah, they all have 2 supplies, and there's only one cord plugged into them.
Okay. But are you
I
in one of the power supplies, or are you in with a Y cable going into
no, no,
both?
no, no, no. I'm just in one power supply. I
Okay.
put 2 power supplies in them, so when the first one blows up, I can just go, oh yeah, okay, it works again.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the power thing, I mean, as long as you design things right and you're aware of, your loads that you're plugging into, like if you're at a venue, that, I get so much juice from this wall or that wall, the other wall, or if I'm in a big distribution thing. As long as you got a handle on what's coming from where, it's easy to know kind of like, all right, great, if I hear a UPS going, where is it? And
Yep.
what's it running? And in the case of like my rack, like my core racks have like switcher, video router, intercom frame, conversion, frame sinks and stuff. I mean, that's all one box. There's only one power cord on it. So
Right.
it kind of doesn't make much sense to try to repower it another way, because a lot of the gear in there doesn't have dual power supplies. So the rack's either on or it's not. So it's important to keep the rack on. So yeah, it's in a dual conversion UPS. And yeah, as soon as I hear a beep, I'm like, all right, where's that? And what
All
can
right.
we do about it?
Fun side story. I don't have it in because I didn't think about it till just now, but fun side story. Studio Technology makes a box for Dante Comms that has a light on the top of it. And so it's a call light. So you press a button, you hold it down, and it sends a pulse in a certain tone to this box. That box lights up, flashes. It also can be made to make a tone. And the tone they picked is identical to the APC UPS tone. And it's like it's not like beep, 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 or anything like that. It's beep, beep, beep. It's identical. When the first time we set that off, I was like, oh, what's broke? The same thing as we all hone in on that APC
Sure.
sounds like something's going to break, something's down. So we put this up with the Hawkeye guys at the last show we did in Delray, knowing good well that sound is the same as all their UPSs in there. And we had a great time that week. I just want to say. They had a great time.
Well, you're as bad as
It
I
was
am.
about 3 days before they caught on that it was every time we hit call button, but they would never wear their comms. So, and of course with them, they're throwing comms off like, where's the beep? Where's the beep? Where's the beep? Because they were running so many servers up there. All right, so let's talk about servers though. And Sal, you might be able to think about this too. Is like with so much power that we're pulling in a normal given situation, it's like Greg and I are both using these Dell 3930s. They're on idle. They're like, you barely run it. But if you really, really start pushing them, and you really start getting that the CPU to full tilt, which in 80, 90%, especially, you're doing a really heavy encode, like last week when we were doing the testing with the NDI
graphics
Bridge.
cards, and then
All those
spinning
fans are running
discs.
faster. They're pulling more power, right?
Yeah, and
So-
especially doing power, power
Yeah,
on when you're powering things
hold,
on.
hold on though. This
That's
would be a
usually when you
better.
hit them extra.
This would be a much better story if it wasn't a 550 watt power supply in there.
Good
Yeah.
point. This is a good
Yep.
point. But I have a stack of 12 of them sitting in there. So that's power by numbers. All right. So the same situation happened as I was running off our virtual machines off this 45 drive server, which is a single Xeon. I actually don't even know what the power supply is in it.
Yeah, but
I
at that
would
point, it
imagine-
doesn't matter. What matters is the 45 spinning drives in it. That that's the
This-
draw.
This is part of it, yes.
Yeah.
So we weren't beating on the drives, but we started running the virtual machines on it, and that was bringing the CPU speed up. And the CPU speed, of course, then was pulling more power. And
Sure.
that's exactly what we ran into, was that the 45 drives was tripping the breaker alongside, even though up to that point it was all fine. But I threw one more virtual machine on it, and
That
that
was
put it
enough
over
then.
the top of the draw, and then we had to split the rack apart again because of that number. Because you don't, Kilowatt lied to me. He said, oh no, it's only 4 amps. But as it turns out, once it kicks in to full speed, I was
Yeah.
pulling out of that machine itself is about 9 amps. So
Yeah,
there's a
or
lot of power.
if you have to replace a disk and the RAID has to rebuild, now it's reading off of all the disks in the unit, whether you're accessing them or not, or if you're doing scrubbing or anything like that. So, yeah, I mean, I mean, you should go off the power supply. If it's a 900 watt, 1600 watt power supply, use that as your, I mean, you always have to have a safety factor. And by using that, it's already kind of built into that, right? Because if you're tripping your power supply, I mean, at that point, you've got bigger problems.
This is true. This is true. And whenever we were talking about UPSs earlier, would we say that what are you pushing on average? I mean, I'm probably pushing 60, 70%. Where is your safety margin that you would have on any given rack? You said 20 amps is what you asked for, Greg. You're at most really pushing under 15.
Yeah, no,
12?
most of them are like, I think it's like 9 or 10. And again, I come up with that number, when we build a rack, I let it run for like 2 weeks. And if it's in the summer, I put it either in one of the garages that doesn't have air conditioning, not in the house, or, so no climate control. And I let it burn for at least 7 days, usually 14, so we want to see if anything's going to fail for heat.
Yeah, but granted, you're in Utah, so what is that like? It's like 42 degrees at this point.
Not in the summertime. We get triple digits here all the time in the summer. So
I love picking on you, Greg.
yeah, no, that's fine. But that ammeter, the clamp-on
Yeah.
one that I was talking about, one of the cool things on it is it has a peak hold. So I can put that on,
Yeah.
and at the end of 2 weeks, I can
That's a
look
great
at it
idea.
and say, look, here's the highest juice this rack ever hit. Okay. And then add an amp or two, and then put a little P-Touch label on the rack. This rack consumes so many amps. So I don't have to remember what rack is what. There's a little sticker right on the back. And again, when we're
That's a
designing
good
a
idea.
show,
Actually,
know,
I haven't
Just-
done that. That's a great idea.
Something to keep an eye out for is that'll be great for breakers, right? To size a breaker up, but not
Mhm.
necessarily for a UPS, because that doesn't take into account the power factor. So by
All
using
right,
the amp
Come
meter,
on, Sal, bring the power
no,
factor.
it gets overly complicated, but it basically
well,
means
it's still a
whenever the
ballpark.
voltage is lagging or or going or preceding the current, and it's usually with inductive and capacitive loads, and at that point, I mean, for, for a certain current draw, you may be, consuming more or less power depending on where things are sitting at. And that's where you might be on the, appropriately sized breaker, but then your UPS is not performing as, when you see those KVAs, that's for a, power factor of 1, if you want to translate that into wattage. So, 1,000 KVA UPS, it's 1,000 watts, assuming a power factor of 1.
But usually
once-
you need to read in that manufacturer to find out what their power factor is, because they have to disclose that usually. So
For devices,
most of
yes,
them,
but it's one of those hard things to measure.
Well, and the other thing too is there's always a maximum current output on a UPS too. I've
Mhm.
got 3 different 1500 VAs, UPSs, but they all have different amounts. One of them will put out a max of 750 watts. One of them will do 1,000 watts. One of them will do 1,250 watts. I mean, you have to be cognizant of how much load am I going to put on this. And yeah, you never want to run 100%. You're
No,
asking for trouble.
not
I
even
mean, it's
close
like
yet
you
to
don't,
that,
when
yeah.
you're driving down the interstate, you don't have your car in 3rd gear and have your tack at red line, right? That's not good, right? You'd rather have it
I
way
would
down here.
prefer to be under 70%, honestly.
Yeah,
That's where
I agree. I
found
think 70 is
was,
a great max number.
especially if you're running a lot of computers like we are, because I feel like that then I'm at idle, I'm under 70%, I could get a peak and be able to stomach it. And that's one of the things I didn't plan well enough with that single UPS that we had in there. So now with the dual UPSs, we dropped our overall usage down. That said, because these are line interactive, okay, so the other thing too, besides line interactive, Greg, as you mentioned earlier, the other thing is modified sine wave and pure sine wave. Those are major differences in the cost of the UPS. If the UPS is $300, it is not a pure sine wave 99.9% of the time. You're going to be looking at $500 or $600 at minimum. Upwards, I'm spending like these are $1,500 or so for these big ones that we are using. But it
Depends on what
the
you're feeding,
manufacturer,
though.
too.
I mean, modified sine wave isn't necessarily a bad thing.
For some computers, though, it is. And
Mhm.
specifically, there were a line of computers that I use that they run with TriCaster 850s that they would not run on a modified sine wave. It would automatically reboot as soon as the power came over. And
It
that was
depends
when we built,
on the power supply, how much filtering is going on the power
yes,
supply.
and these were server class. I mean, they were
Mhm.
like at that time they were really expensive power supplies that were in those units, and they couldn't believe that was the problem. Like, look, I'm telling you,
Yeah.
this is the problem because we're using this UPS, and we moved them to pure sine waves. Never a problem after that, and so it was a recommended course of action for everybody. Standard operating procedures always use pure sine wave, and so from
Mhm.
that point on, I always have.
Yeah.
I'm finding as I'm delving a little bit into the power side for solar and basically battery power storage effectively. So grid power storage. I'm not going the Tesla Powerwall route because I just don't want to do solar on my roof. But I have another couple of manufacturers that I've been talking with and working out some deals
But
with.
You could do
And
Tesla and grid charge.
that's effectively it's just a
Yeah, just not off brand, of course. Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so I've been looking at this in our cube that we're building, the 20 foot container. This is one of the things we're going to do is put a Powerwall type setup in there.
Type
So
setup, yeah.
it's an 18 kilowatt inverter, and then it's running off of that. It will do split phase, so we'll get 220 volts off of that one converter, that one hybrid converter. It'll
Nice.
take in solar, it'll take in battery, it'll take in shore power, and it'll use the better of all the worst. As I was finding out when I was looking at them, the one thing I couldn't find really well, Victron is the
Victron is a leader,
top of
yeah.
the top, right? They're
Mhm.
they're the best. And they'll openly tell you it's 20 milliseconds is what their changeover time
The
is. So I
switching,
started
yeah.
looking
Mhm.
at the UPS side of things. I'm like, oh yeah, their turnover is like 5 milliseconds is an average, 5 to 10. The better ones are closer to 5, unless it's what, like Greg said, a double conversion, then it's on the inverter all the time. It basically is all you're building anyway. So that was one
Switch
of the
over
things.
time of 0.
Yes, exactly. And that is absolutely the best way. And so that's what I was looking at in the one in this inverter part I found. I think it's EG4's inverter. It actually allowed you to run in that mode. So you can tell it is like, I want to always run off the batteries no matter what. And then whenever you have shore power or solar, either or, it just charges directly the batteries instead of actually going back and forth, switching back and forth between power. So I'm interested and been interested in that. And my parents are going to be the first guinea pigs for that system. I'm got them almost set up now. And then we're going to move it into our production side too, because this whole UPS thing has become a bigger issue for some power in some of the places we go. And so that was where I started looking at it more and more. It's like we're throwing batteries away and changing out batteries probably once a year. I know some other people might not get that kind of life out of them, but we were going through them pretty fast. And and every
And then-
one of them was about a $500 overhaul on that.
Yeah, and then battery capacity is another important thing, right? Because you've got this amazing UPS, but then you've got 5 minutes to switch over to whatever alternative
Yeah.
power source, right?
And that's
And
the
you
problem.
may
We
need
didn't have
more
that
time.
alternative.
Sometimes
power
when you're
supports.
sizing it, that's another consideration. Hey, because their run times and the small type will say, hey, this is estimated at 20% load or 50% load, when it tells
Right.
you it'll give you 1 hour of of reserve power. And it's usually at very minimal load. So that's another thing to keep in mind. You might have a super sized UPS, but the battery's tiny and won't give you much time, just enough time to shut things down, which for live production is not an option.
Originally, that was my goal, was just give me enough time to shut down. When we were in the bus, we had generators, so we could literally, if we lost shore power, which we
just flip
did
it.
on multiple things, we just reach up there, flip the switch, and hit the generator button. Boom, we're up and running. And there was never a problem, so we could get by with 5 minutes of turnover time. In the van, we don't have that luxury. We don't have a generator in there, but we do have an inverter. So we have our backup power. We have shore power coming in, but our backup power is a 3,000 watt inverter, which is being fed off of a lithium ion battery, which is then also being charged by the alternator that's on the van. So we just reach over there, start the van. If we go to battery power on the inverter, and we could actually run everything. We lose our AC though, but that's okay because the van's running, so we can just turn the front end AC on. But we we don't have quite enough power in that inverter.
Enough power. The ACs
to
are really
handle
hard to
overhead
the-
AC. And those are RV ACs, which are absolutely terrible and super
very
power
inefficient.
hungry.
Yeah.
Very, very inefficient. Yeah.
Efficient. Especially startup, you need some sort of soft start capacitor to be able to
Try
do
those.
any and still
It was, and we tried everything each way. Their technology is finally starting to trickle into that business now, and they have some new ones that are actually 12 volt and 24 volt DC air conditioners. And so
nice.
I think maybe the next one we build, and that's the next vehicle, we probably might look into putting those in. That way we're not having to do that double power conversion, and it'll run off of just the battery source at that point, and just have to charge the battery.
And then the other thing I was looking at, which I'm not very familiar with, but I know there are server power supplies that run on 48 volts DC.
Yes,
that
I
way
was saying earlier, some rails you can get a rail in a rack at a colo, for instance, that's 48 volts.
48 volts. And if you do that, you save a lot of power, because there's a lot of inefficiency going from AC to DC and then DC to back to AC. So it starts to add up there. The
All right,
losses.
so we're gonna play How Big's My Pants game. What is the biggest UPS you've ever seen?
Crap. I don't know the capacity, but it was at least 30 square feet full of waste level size units, and this was at an oil and gas company, and it was for their video department. They had a bunch of rack mounted equipment, both servers and just their production equipment. And it was massive. It was massive. I don't know what the capacity was like.
I don't know, honestly. I don't know what the capacity is. The one that I saw, and I knew there were bigger UPSs out there because I've been in some of those colos and data centers and stuff. I hadn't seen this one before though. And when we were working alongside the Hawkeye guys, they have in their rider, they have to have a UPS, and it has to be able to support X amount of power, right? And so, and which is they use some kind of UK numbers that don't add up the same as ours here, because it's a stupid amount of power for the amount of computers and servers and stuff they put out there. But anyway, they were like, "Oh, your UPS is here." I was like, "I don't. What do you mean my UPS?" Because everything comes to us whenever we're on a site, right? and they drop off a forklift is there with this box on it. I call it a box. It looked like a refrigerator. And I was like, what are you talking about? A UPS? And it's like, well,
Yeah.
this is supposed to be for Hawkeye. I was like, well, that's not us. They're over there. And so I bring them over there. They drop it off. They pull the top off of it. That was not the top. That was just a lid. And it was literally the size of your refrigerator.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I have
massive.
not, and they were like, what do you plug into this? You know, there's no plugs. It was all you had to wire it in.
You are,
And
yeah.
so the electrician comes over with his 50 amp plugs, like we were talking about earlier, Greg, like to run the whole van off of. Yeah, that UPS was probably in the neighborhood, and it was 3-phase, so I had to get power into it 3-phase. And I would imagine it was probably 100 kilowatt or so. I mean, it was huge, huge. And I'd never seen anything that big. And the whole time, like, what did that rent for? Because it was a rental. It's like, what did that
Wow.
rent for?
Yeah. Just the
Oh,
ship and
wait.
delivery charge. Just the delivery charge. Yeah.
It just
How much did it weigh?
It was heavy enough that they had to have a real forklift underneath it. So, I mean, when I say a real forklift, I'll make not just a little mini one, not just unlug the docks. I'm talking about a real forklift. And yeah, everything was huge, just so huge. And then it took them about 20, 30 minutes to wire it in and everything.
Wow.
I think that I think we pretty much beat that to the pulp. I want to suggest though that our that one tool that I mentioned earlier, we'll recap on that one, Kilowatt. If you don't have one of those in your tech kit, buy one at $25, $30, whatever. They're the cheap and easy way that you don't have to get out bare wires as Greg is doing, because he likes bare wires.
Well, it's not
or the
bare.
little adapters.
They're still insulated. Safety
There's somewhere
first.
insulation on them. But it's a lot less scary to people if you bring that little kilowatt thing too, and like, okay, this is what my power is. I use it, honestly, I don't use it on the show sites because it's only up to 15 amps. So because of that, I don't use on show sites to tell me anything. I'm using my UPSs to tell me everything at that point. And then I use it just for testing the devices to make sure they're not lying to me at that point. I know this light or this fixture or this rack or whatever is going to be pulling 12 amps. Okay, there it is. That is. I do want to touch on one thing that we're talking about being on site, voltage. If you don't have as Greg says, have a voltmeter in your kit, no matter what, measure the voltage. So we were providing, and we're doing mostly outdoor events for the last 12 years. So we're provided power. Put your meters on it before you plug it into the truck. I have double safeties in my system set up. So whenever everybody's standard operating procedure may be a little different. Mine is, you get that plug, it's a female, you stick the leads in there, and everybody knows how to do this. It works for me. You stick the leads in there, you measure the power on what it is. Then after that, you can plug it in the truck. Then you read the meters that are in the truck, because the meters are before the breakers. That's the key part. There's somebody I know, friend of ours, Greg, that didn't have his truck, that somebody changed it, but the meters are after the breakers. That's no good. You want the meter before the breaker, so that when you plug in their trailer, your truck or whatever, you plug the power into it, you can glance up there, look at the meter and go, oh, it's one of them's 120 and the other one's 270. Well, that means they gave you a hot leg that should not be there. And it has also come across times too, whenever like the California twist, as we call them, the 50 amp twist locks, they're probably abused. They're probably well abused. They're coming out of big totes and things like that. They get twisted too many times inside and they pull the wires out inside. Well, they may have a hot and a neutral that get crossed up, and you wouldn't necessarily know that it was a bad thing until you plugged it into your gear. So meter, don't let the magic smoke come out. So it's just one of those things to always make sure you have for sure.
Yeah, and I'd say both a meter and I know you touched on this, but one of those dongles that tells you whether it's wired correctly or not. Which I know you can do with the meter.
Yes.
You can tell with the meter, but if you don't want to go into that, just make sure that the hot's hot, neutral's neutral, and ground is ground, right? Because yeah,
And I've noticed that, especially if you're running on generators, that can also be a trouble because sometimes they don't ground the generator. They don't put a lead into the ground to actually ground the generator, especially rental companies that just don't care. They may run with Sunbelt, for instance. So be careful whenever you're measuring your power too. Make sure you have an active ground that is actually truly a ground, or else you possibly could have a health issue present itself. It's a shocking awareness once you find out, that's for sure.
oh yeah,
Besides that point, and knowing your voltage that is right going in, you do need to be able to monitor it as you're going through your show. One of these situations where they're like, oh, here's your plug. I'm like, oh, great. We didn't have to run our feeder. But I didn't realize the crew didn't realize they ran out 300 foot of 50 amp cable. Well, the line loss
voltage drop. Yeah, the voltage
over
drop.
that,
Yeah.
by the time it got to us, it was 114 volts. All
Wow.
right, that's great. And then we started powering our own things. We're down to 110. And everybody says 110 is okay. No, it's not. Not for computers and the UPS. Here's the reason why. The UPS was trying to make up that voltage the whole time. And so it was having to charge itself to get it out the 120 volts that we have it spec to. That's what our output's set to, is 120 volt AC. So it was trying to make it up the whole time. Well, halfway through the day, sure enough, it caught up because the voltage kept dropping lower and lower and lower. The
Ran out of
UPS
battery,
finally
yeah.
says, I can't give you any more. I'm done, and shut itself off. So all those things, keep it in mind, is make sure you're measuring your voltage, make sure you keep an eye on your voltage. We found these great little things on Amazon. They're little, maybe a 1 inch by 1 inch square. It's bright LEDs. It shows you voltage, amperage, and wattage, and it's like $20 a piece at most. So we have one of those for each leg that we have coming into the truck, and at one glance you just look up there, you know where you're at. If you wanted to go smarter, of course, some people do, you could have more interactive information coming from your UPS. I got a feeling Greg probably does that. Do you? No, you play dummy on the UPS? Come on, Greg. I'm so disappointed.
Why? I mean, the UPS is spitting out 120 no matter what the line is doing.
But don't you want to know if it turns off? It sends you an email.
I think I'll know if it turns off, and it won't be sending me an email if it turns off.
That's always been my approach too. Exactly. It's like, I don't know if everything's off. I'm pretty sure I know it's off. Yeah. So that one light that's on the unswitched, right? The one light that's not on the battery backup. It's like, yep, if that light goes off, it's bad. Yeah. What about you, Sal? You work in the data centers some too. So are you one of those that has all the SNMP
MP stuff.
information?
So it's usually the UPS and power is usually managed by their customers
Okay.
internals IT. There are a couple customers where I do set them up, and but they have IT. They don't do much management, so it's email. It's email or things shut down. And I do because a lot of what I do is just setting them up with network attached storage, and I do set up the servers to shut down. If they power goes down, I want them to shut down gracefully, because I don't want to. I'd rather deal with the customer's downtime and get those angry calls that why can't I get to my server, than to be dealing with data loss. So yeah, I just set everything up to graciously shut down.
That's understandable.
Yeah.
Here comes that guy. All right, Jonas, tell us what you got your hand up. So tell us about your Magic 220 and why it's all better and everything.
I don't need to tell you. You already know. No, I
'Cause it's
actually had
more, right?
it's more and it's better and the plugs are better, but details. I was actually wondering how often you also measure your curves. Like, do you have enough power conditioning on the end of your truck that you don't care if they mess up their curves? Or do you not? Or the waves? Or do you measure that as well? Because like one of the things, good friend of mine's dad spent all his life driving around facilities and figuring out what device messes up their 50 hertz and making
Yeah.
sure it doesn't do that anymore. And then the other thing is, since I'm always the cloud guy, there's a great article from Cloudflare about a huge outage that they had. Send a link in the chat. That ended up being related to power failure in their data center. That was quite interesting to read because, yeah, then you suddenly realize, oh yeah, all those servers that you can just rent in AWS, if they have a total power loss, it's gonna be a while till they can get them up because they need to slowly power them on, and it's a really interesting story. Was the Portland data center that went down, and
And was
backups
it the
didn't work,
AWS
and-
data center?
No, it was Cloudflare.
Oh, it was Cloudflare.
Was in
Okay.
Cloudflare's I forgot one of their partners, and basically they didn't know that they lost one of the legs of the power, and the whole thing went down. And they only had all the analytics and data plane was out of that region, so that's why everything came crashing down. No, but the waves is something that I think I've heard more problems with that versus like voltage drop here, but I also haven't been that much around trucks and outside stuff where you would need to worry about that. And we have to get electricians most of the time who then just perform very well to code and spec, show
Sure.
you their measurements, and then like, okay, sure, I can just plug in here.
And would you say though? I mean, Greg, I know you're moving stuff around and going in and out of venues. Sal, you're doing similar things too. So I'm of the feeling is like every rack has a UPS in it. How many people have you seen though? Other productions and things. I think audio people are probably some of the worst about just plugging willy-nilly into any
Oh,
plug.
they do.
anywhere.
Hey,
Hey, Andy, maybe you could actually add in some of that. So what is it about audio guys not wanting to use a UPS behind a $20,000 audio board?
you know, the way I measure power is if the subs start to sound flubby, I know that the voltage is down. You know, when they sound fine, I'm like, okay, everything's fine now.
It's a good
No,
point.
actually,
That's
no,
actually a really good point.
To that point though, no, this is actually and I think I have this right. Some speakers, powered speakers, pull all they're always operating at their maximum amperage draw, and
Right.
some don't. And that I've seen people get into trouble with that because they start like, oh, I'll just put out all these speakers. I'm only going to turn the system's I'm only doing reinforcement. It's not very loud. Yet all the speakers are running at, their maximum draw. And then they're like wondering, why did I pop a breaker? I've seen that happen.
Definitely.
If I remember right, the old like QSC K series, the original ones, they'll fluctuate, and then the newer ones, if I'm not mistaken, they're pulling maximum. But I might have that wrong. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, that's just something to think about, though.
For sure.
When you're plugging stuff in. Yeah.
I could definitely attest to that myself from running some of those QSCs out, and like you're doing great, and then you start really hitting it, or the crowd gets there, and you're needing to fill in a few more seats,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, and sure enough, you start pulling a little bit more than you should. And I remember back in the good old days of Crown MH5000s and
Oh, yeah.
3600s, like a 5000 was a 30 amp healthy circuit every time. Like if you turned it on, you couldn't even turn it on a 20 amp usually because
Yeah.
it had a big 30 amp plug on it. But
Mhm.
oh man, those are some good old days when the rack weighed 600 pounds, just the amp rack. But whenever you turn on those, you can see the lights dim in the next city kind of thing. And then when you really but it's funny you should say that. You could hear the differences of how the amps were working and how hard they were working because the sound was different than what the speakers were doing. This whole fancy schmancy self-powered stuff, it's just a fad. Don't worry, Andy. We're going to get back to running real copper before too long. But it does really, and I mentioned that because I was being facetious and a little picking on you a little bit, Andy, but it does amaze me that I find that when I'm working alongside in other sound companies, whatever, is they will have all this gear, thousands, tens of thousands of dollars worth of stuff,
Plugged in directly to the
and
yeah.
no UPS whatsoever.
Nothing, no
Yeah.
filtering or anything. Yeah.
Yeah, it blows
Yeah,
me away.
I'm not, well, I think if it's broadcast, yeah, why not? You know, you're not powering all these, you know, you're not doing a lot of power amps, you know, it's not a big draw, right?
Sure.
You know, it's a console and some outboard gear maybe and some other peripherals, but it's not a big draw. But yeah, once you get into a PA system, you know, and I don't see that. I don't see UPSs on a full rig, you know, and I'm not doing a lot of those shows these days, but
I wouldn't
Um,
imagine it on a full rig. I wouldn't see it on that, but just
No.
on the console itself, I just
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Greg. I mean,
Yeah.
but
I've
then
seen
again,
it. I mean,
how
and
many
it's
trucks
usually-
have a UPS that'll run a whole OB truck?
I mean, the excuse
Can
that
I
I keep
count that on
hearing-
your hand?
Well,
Nope.
you know, we don't call it UPS. We call it the other generator. I mean, when we do golf, I mean,
Sure.
you got to consider that, okay, so I'm on a truck that's 4 trailers, and the main trailer takes at least 200 amps, and the other 3 trailers take at least 100 amps each. So that's what, 2, 3, 4, that's 500 amps for that rig. The RF truck's next door. There's a support unit. There's another B unit somewhere. You know, we've got these massive generators that are like basically your 20-foot container has
Yep.
a big ass diesel engine and a gen
Yep.
set in it. And that's all that's in there.
Yep.
And there's massive cam locks that come off the side of it into distribution. And then there's another one of those on the flatbed. And, you know, for set days, we only run one, but when, you know, especially like US Open or Masters or something, well, actually Masters is all shore power, but we still have these generators there in case the shore power fails. And we have a way to switch over 1,000 amps of truck clunk to, you know, another power source.
Well, they also
So-
could do the generators at the same time. I ran
Yeah,
into
yeah,
this
yeah. I
at
was going to
show,
say, so
and
on
it's an
show
auto s-
days,
they're
on
both
show days
synced
on
up.
site, yes,
Right.
they run sync between the Jennies. They both run concurrently so that if one fails, you've just got access to half the power, but it's generating potentially double what we need.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, that's how we do power on site. I mean, and then that's the UPS. Now, there's still most trucks now, there's still a UPS on the switcher frame, on the router frame, on the audio frame. Because those are things you don't want crashing, you know, and sometimes a lot of trucks will put them on like, there's one truck that actually has a UPS on the intercom, which I thought was the most useful thing ever.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If you
Because
still
the
have
power went out
right?
and I could still tell people, hey, relax, we just lost power. We'll be right with you. But that's like one truck in how many decades of me being on the road that I actually saw that.
True. Very
But
true.
yeah, the big ticket items, you know, you don't want stuff like that crashing. So,
No,
but
it's
yeah,
understandable.
outside of that, I mean, nothing's on a UPS because I mean, the odds of us, you know, running out of power, I mean, seriously, you could probably count on these 2 hands the time my truck actually went dark.
Yeah.
In,
And I
in
think in
30
corporate
years.
in corporate events, I see the excuse that I usually hear is like, "Hey, if power goes out, there's no lights, there's no anything, the event is completely down." But you also have power conditioning to deal with, right? So you may have power, but the devices are not going to behave, or you may experience crashing, you may experience certain things that you cannot explain otherwise, and it's usually just dirty power or bad power. And sometimes it's all the RF, right? Everything, all these noisy devices, all these noisy cheap power supplies, and the more, and nothing against the Chinese, but the more cheap Chinese stuff we start plugging in with these crappy power supplies, they start kind of contaminating the whole
Very
power
true.
network. So power
LED
conditioning is
walls.
important. Yeah. LED walls. Oh my God.
walls.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, they are some of the
Noisiest.
LED
Yeah.
walls are some of the noisiest and some of
Mhm.
the dirtiest power. They RF and everything else they put off is just terrible.
Crazy. Mhm.
ISO LED walls and GFCIs, no friends at all. No, they're terrible on each other.
Well, even some
Ask
power
me how
breakers.
I know.
Even some
many of
power
them.
breakers. Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
something about the surging and stuff and the switching, because they're usually,
Mhm.
if you open up an LED wall, I could almost do it, but I got one right behind me. But if you open up one of the power supplies, it looks like a computer power supply. It's taking 110 in, and it's giving you a 5-volt or a 12-volt rail that the LED section is running off of. So they're not like magic, conversions and stuff, but it's usually the cheapest of the cheapest of the cheapest of the cheapest to be able to get to a price point for that one section of wall and that one power supply. And I've replaced a few of ours in our older panels, and they were like $20 a piece. I mean, there was nothing to really have a few extra with you if you needed them. But anyway, don't even get me on LED walls for now. There's so many pains and so many scars I've had over the years with those. But anyway, that's kind of what we were talking about today. Eric, thanks a lot for coming. Did you have anything you wanted to add in any fun stuff that you've factored in with some of your power experience?
No, I think this is just a great community and group to learn from you guys. I'm at a very small level where we're just trying to use the 1500 VAs on our Mac Studios and our monitors, just making sure that's all backed up. So just hearing about some of these bigger possibilities and the things that might be out there and might encounter is very helpful. But I don't have any big UPS stories that I can share today.
Hopefully you want it with this information. Hopefully you won't have to have any
Exactly.
stories.
Exactly.
The main thing with you brought up something I didn't think about this earlier is monitors. Just ask me how I know. If you build a truck and you have UPSs in it, don't forget about your monitors, because you can't shut down said computers if you don't have monitors to see said computers.
Of course.
Sometimes you learn things the hard way.
Yeah, you go, why? Yeah, I don't need to plug this. This is not critical, right? Why do I put it?
Right.
Why do I take out one more outlet out of that UPS?
Exactly.
Yeah, been there.
Exactly.
I've got one question. I don't know if you covered this earlier, is on fly packs
Mhm.
with UPSs. What are you like? What is the like? How long can you lose power on your typical fly packs that you guys build? You know, so that you can, because I don't think you can have enough UPS in there really on a smaller fly pack to run the thing for very long, right? It's like 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
5 to 10
No,
minutes.
I get about 20 to 30 on the UPSs that I run my core rack on, but that's about it. Yeah, you know, if the mains don't come back on before then, we're off the air.
Mhm.
But
Got it.
it's a means of, you know, knowing that, okay, there's no juice, I can shut things down gracefully so I don't like,
Exactly.
you know, corrupt my touch drive again.
Yeah.
Or,
How do you know
know,
about that?
yeah, right.
Yeah,
So-
so 5 to 10 minutes is probably on average runtime that I would probably say that I could gracefully. That's where I'd like to be. But like I said, I was running those UPSs, the APC UPSs, way too hard. That we had one in the truck, one in the van, one in the trailer, one in the van, and each one of those were exactly the same size, so they're 2,000 watts. But it was running too hard at that point. And it is going back to that monitor thing. It's amazing how much power the monitors will pull too. And so one of our ways of doing that was turn off except for the one monitor that we had on our KVM that we could go to every machine and shut it down. So we squeezed just a few more minutes out of it that way. But there's nothing worse than that beeping sound. And whenever it speeds up, things just tend to pucker even much more faster. So yeah, oh, this is a great conversation, everybody. I really appreciate you coming and hanging out. Welcome to our new people that have come back for the first time and come over for the first time, and all those that have come back. I don't know why you do it, but I appreciate you, and thanks for hanging out. And I'm looking forward to next week. I'm going to be on the road. I'm going to be actually up in St. Louis, so we're going to do a show from the road. I don't know what we're going to do. So don't ask Jonas until next week. Well, but we'll come up with something. But I appreciate you guys, and look forward to seeing you next week.